The Georgia legislature kicked off its 2025 session with a lot of controversy today, and I, for one, am not happy about it, I can just tell you. So it all began when Speaker David Ralston, who is the late David Ralston, was Speaker of the Georgia House of Representatives. During his term of Speaker, he passed laws that gave state legislators particular dispensation when they were defending people in court if their representation interfered with their legislative duties. Well, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported that David Ralston abused this law to the advantage of his clients, and that the result was that certain victims of his clients were left with no justice. So last year, there was a move in the Georgia legislature to honor David Ralston, naming, I believe, a building after him. Senator Colton Moore from Northwest Georgia went to the well of the Senate and spoke his mind and protested this action. Here's a clip.
Heard a lot about courage and conviction from the previous speaker. Majority Leader referenced fierce independence. Well, I reckon the speaker and myself come from a similar bloodline. Because, Senators, I rise today in a steadfast opposition to Senate Resolution 687. My fellow senators, I think to bring a comparison to who this man was, we should first look at one of the greatest Georgians to ever live. A man who is globally recognized as a symbol of justice. Who am I talking about? Martin Luther King Jr. A man, what did he say? He said an injustice anywhere was a threat to justice everywhere. Powerful words that we should think about as we vote for this resolution. Because this body is about to perpetually memorialize, in my opinion, one of the most corrupt Georgia leaders we'll ever see in our lifetimes. I first remember learning about a girl named Haley when I served in the chamber across the way. Haley was brutally raped, sodomized in her living room by a man her family trusted. That man was Jason Brothers, and he hired Speaker David Ralston as his attorney, not to defend him, but to protect him from justice. You see, for nearly a decade, this case rocked on, and Haley became terminally ill, never seeing justice. Her family once walked in on her in a bathtub with blood as she contemplated suicide. And you probably say, Senator, well, that's just one case. Where can you go with that? But no, there were several more. There was a case of a lady who lost her daughter in her arms as she bled out because a man was driving drunk. Destroyed the woman's family. But she wasn't able to get justice because the man charged with the DUI hired Speaker David Ralston as his attorney. You see, there was a man named Derek Key who for 10 years delayed cases after molesting a 14-year-old child being protected by David Ralston. Now, how did David Ralston do this? We heard about him being chairman of Judiciary Non-Civil. Well, back in 2006, there was a bill called Senate Bill 503. The man created the legislative leave and then profited off of it. making hundreds of thousands of dollars protecting people from justice. You see, the truth is hard to hear.
Senator,
Mr. President,
we got decorum, rules here in this chamber. I think you've made your point, sir. So if you could just go ahead and wrap up, we'd be appreciative.
Mr. President, I know it's hard to hear, but there were thousands of case delays. And make no mistake, these egregious examples I've given is no semblance of morality. You see, we as lawmakers are supposed to protect the vulnerable, Mr. President. We're supposed to protect children. We're supposed to protect law enforcement officers. Think about the law enforcement officers who were assaulted and weren't able to get to justice because of this man. You see, the Speaker turned a blind eye to what we as legislators know to be truth. And records show that after he was Speaker, he did not attend another court case. You see, he had more than 164 clients, because if you're not trying those clients, you just pick up more and more of them. No court, less work. He had an operation. He was running an industry, Mr. President, and all he was using was a simple form letter, sending it to the court, referencing the code section that the man created in 2006.
Senator, not the time or the place. Not the time or place.
Mr.
Go ahead and
President,
yield the well, Senator.
at your request.
Thank you, Senator.
So you can see that Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones cut him off and said that this was not the time nor the place. It bears mentioning that David Ralston's relatives were in the Senate gallery. Colton Moore may have been telling the truth that it was an inappropriate time and place. Well, that then caused John Burns, the Speaker of the Georgia House of Representatives, to bring a motion before the Georgia House to ban Colton Moore from the floor of the House. So wind the clock forward, and then today, the Georgia legislature held a joint session of the House and the Senate. When Colton Moore attempted to enter the House of Representatives to attend the joint session, which he had every right to attend based on the Constitution and the laws, here's what happened.
You don't have to be in the way. You're breaking the law too. Stop. That's it. Come on, it's gone too far. It has gone too far. I have an obligation to be in that room. I represent 200,000 people in Northwest Georgia who duly elected me to be here today. And you're hindering that. Unconstitutional.
Go ahead.
You have no respect for the Constitution.
I need you to step away.
Complete disrespect to the Constitution.
I need you to step away from the door now.
Okay. The doorkeeper said you were not allowed in. Sir, the doorkeeper has no authority. Sir, as a senator of the joint session, I have more authority than this doorkeeper of the House. Let me in. Okay.
Now, I don't know what you think, but I think that this smacks of pettiness, the good old boy system, and perhaps just outright corruption existing within the Georgia House of Representatives, to some extent in the Georgia Senate. Colton Moore has been the lone voice challenging the ethics and the conduct of the late David Ralston. And he's now being punished for having a moral compass. To me, it is absolutely wrong. I think that John Burns has lost the moral authority to lead, siding instead with his friend, departed friend, and colleague who abused his authority, who took advantage of the laws that he was responsible for passing for the benefit of his clients and to the detriment of their victims. I'm sorry, folks. I never met David Ralston. I know very little about him. I know that he has got a legion of support within the Georgia legislature. That sways me not at all. It appears as if he abused his authority. Colton Moore has every right as an elected representative of the people of Northwest Georgia, 200,000 people who he represents, to go to the well of the Senate and speak his mind on a resolution that is being debated. And damn John Burns, who in the hell does he think he is? What right does he have to ban a duly elected representative from the floor of his chamber in a joint session of the legislature? I think, Mr. Burns, it is time for you to go. So does David Cross, the first vice president of the Georgia Republican Party. He writes that he strongly condemns the actions of Representative John Burns and calls for the immediate removal of the speaker. The speaker violated Senator Moore's constitutional right to represent his constituents, and in so doing, disgracefully upstaged Governor Kemp in his State of the State address. I call for Speaker Burns' immediate resignation. Republicans have been working diligently to advance the supermajority, and Speaker Burns' unconstitutional act creates embarrassment and division that is destructive to our goals, said Cross, second vice president or second vice chair of the Georgia GOP. So there you have it. What do you think? Go into getter.com, look for the John Fredericks Live button, and go tell us in the live chat what you think, or put your comments in YouTube on the live channel for John Gordon Truth. Let us know what you think. We'll send it to John Ralston. We'll send it to Burke Jones. And maybe we can get Colton Moore to come on The Truth and discuss this with us. But what John Burns did is fundamentally wrong. And I'm sorry that you don't like what Colton Moore had to say, Mr. Speaker, but it happens to have the ring of truth. Whose side are you going to be on? Your departed friend, or right or wrong? Now, you can say all you want about disparaging someone who is no longer here to defend themselves. That does not make what they did in this life right. So I, too, am calling for John Burns' resignation. And if he doesn't resign, the legislature should censor him. And Colton Moore, if you're listening, file an action for assault against the Sergeant of Arms of the State House of Representatives. He committed battery upon you. He also abused his authority, and he should be given his exit papers. And that's the way I feel about it. And I'm telling you the truth.
Ladies and gentlemen, a gentleman who does his own talk show, nationally platformed as he is. His name is John Gordon, host of the Truth with John Gordon program, and I welcome him into the House of Lakey and Lakey Unleashed. John, welcome in, sir. Welcome back.
Thank you very much, Jimmy. Nice to be back with you.
Good to have you here, sir. Well, we've got a couple of topics I want to hit with you, but one of those is obviously the big news is the changing of the guard in Washington, D.C., and the Joe Biden's final weekend, and more commutations from Joe Biden for some drug sentences. Give me your thoughts. What are we watching happening? How historic is this?
Well, I don't think we've seen the end of Joe Biden's administration just yet. I have been predicting for a couple of months that on Sunday night, somewhere between the hour of 10 p.m. and midnight, we will see a barrage, a rash of pardons. I'm thinking Jim Biden, Liz Cheney, Adam Schiff, Adam Kinzinger, Nancy Pelosi. I just, the Biden reign of terror is almost over, but we're not out of the woods yet. I think we've got some more bad news to come before he's finished.
Let me ask you this question. To me, these preemptive pardons that they're talking about, has that ever been tested in front of the Supreme Court? Has anybody ever verified that those are actually legitimate? That you can, because it seems like a very dangerous place to be going. That if I'm going to have my friends commit some crimes, I'm going to have them do some things, and right before I leave office, I'll pardon them, and they'll be off the hook before they get caught.
The amount of hypocrisy and duplicity that the Democratic Party is willing to engage in is just mind-boggling to me. They talk about Donald Trump winning a Supreme Court case that granted all presidents immunity for their official acts, as if this was some horrible thing that Trump was going to take advantage of and commit all sorts of crimes. The fact of the matter is, they cannot pin anything on him. They have looked in every corner of his life, and all they can do is make up spurious charges and invent these prosecutions that have gone nowhere. Yet, they are preemptively pardoning people that have not even been charged of a crime. How does that work? How do you reconcile those things? It's just absolutely bizarre to me.
It's bizarre to me as well. John Gordon, my guest, if you're just listening to the program, some of you only take the audio feed, which is fine. Yes, a program called The Truth with John Gordon. I'm sitting here thinking, how do you justify that? I mean, they're worried about Dr. Fauci. What do they think he's... To pardon someone preemptively, you're saying, you know what, they're going to have a legitimate way to make up a charge against Liz Cheney. Well, what are they afraid of? What charge do they think that the Justice Department under Pam Bondi is going to make up about Dr. Fauci? You don't just say, I charge you with a crime. You've got to be able to name a crime. What crime are they afraid that Dr. Fauci committed?
Well, I think you make an excellent point. Did you watch any of the confirmation hearings this week? And did you see Adam Schiff going after Pam Bondi and saying, do you know of any predicate existing that might justify charging Liz Cheney? Well, yeah. How about witness tampering, lying before a congressional committee? I mean, I can think of several crimes. Of course, I kind of still want to know whose cocaine. I heard you talking about cocaine. I still kind of want to know whose coke it was in the White House. You know, and I know, and your listeners know, that the Secret Service knows exactly whose DNA was on that little baggie. And some people speculate that it could be Kamala Harris. I don't know. She acts like she's on something. And I know a good portion of the time she is slightly inebriated. That video of her from Hawaii after she lost the election was an embarrassment. I mean, she's obviously sloshed. Where are her handlers when they need them?
I was watching this video of Macy Hirono. I've been calling her because of the question she keeps asking all these senators. Have you ever had sexual relations with someone unadvanced or whatever? All the Macy Hirono questions she's asking about sexual harassment. I've dubbed her, and pardon me if this offends anybody, but I called her Horny Hirono. I think she's just a dirty old woman that is
living
wanting to
vicariously through others.
Yeah, she's like, oh, please tell me something dirty. I ain't getting no action in my life. I don't know, but she sounds like she's a drunk woman as well. She's the one that asked Pete Hegseth about showing up to work drunk, and I'm thinking her and Kamala might have been drinking out there in Hawaii together. Just speculation on my part.
Well, you know, they say that congresspeople, when they get to Washington, say, how did I ever possibly get here? And after a month, they're asking, how in the world did these people, these other congressmen, ever get here? Because they're whacked. She's a good example of that. And why the people of California cannot see through Adam Schiff and Adam Kinzinger and why they would allow these people to become elected to high office, especially Schiff. I mean, the guy is just a disgrace. There's nobody. Did you ever watch Jim Baker when he was a preacher?
Yeah. Jim and Tammy Faye.
Every now and then, when I was younger, I would be channel surfing and I would land on Jim Baker and Tammy Faye, and I would find myself lingering there just so I could stay there to dislike them because you knew they were such frauds. And I feel the same way with Adam Schiff. There's no one that I watch that I feel is more duplicitous and just makes you want to dislike him more than him and maybe Alejandro Mayorkas. But only 3 more days, and we'll get the good, we'll get the sunshine and let the good times roll.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And, we're watching these California fires burn, and you look at these inept politicians, Karen Bass, the mayor, who was almost the vice president if Kamala Harris wouldn't have been there. Karen Bass showing her just incompetence. You've got Gavin Newsom. You just look at the people of California and say, I know there's a lot of people outside of LA and San Francisco that are better than that, but you would think that the rest of the state, it's pretty obvious how disgusting and horrible these people are, but Gavin Newsom, Karen Bass, Adam Schiff, they get elected out there.
I suspect, without proof, without evidence, but I suspect that the corruption in California runs so deep and so wide that you cannot even begin to estimate it. Why do I say that? Billions of dollars were raised, taxed and raised to build water reservoirs. It was passed 10 years ago. The money has been taxed. Where did it go? But there's not a single, not one reservoir that has been constructed. And they do have a reservoir right there near the Pacific Palisades, and it is empty. And Trump has said, and I believe him, that you capture the runoff from the snow melt, and you capture the rain from Northern California, where it actually does rain a lot, and you allow that water to find its way to Los Angeles and the reservoirs to collect it. And you solve Southern California's water problem. And then Gavin Newsom says, oh, that's just not true. Okay, well, let me tell you, it's not Friday. It's just not true. I mean, it's just insulting to the intelligence of a normal person when he says, well, it's just not true. Well, the sun's not shining. It's just not true.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absurd.
Gavin Newsom can't stand too close to those fires because his hair will catch on fire. That's how he's just but they keep electing him, and you just never, you just shake your head and say, what the heck is going on here? You mentioned we're just a couple of days away from a new regime, a new administration, and we probably have some dark days, some strange pardons coming down. I wouldn't be surprised if he just names all the people on the January the 6th committee and pardons all of them, which would be interesting, John. If they pardon all of them, destroying evidence. Where's the evidence that we hear Liz Cheney and Kinzinger have destroyed? Well, that's a crime. So if you get a preemptive pardon that stands up and that's legal to do preemptive pardons, well, he didn't pardon the staff member that was running things through the shredder. So are Liz Cheney and these J6 committee people going to get a pardon by Joe Biden, and yet the staff member that was carrying out the orders doesn't get the pardon? Are they going to be the ones that face the consequence if a crime was committed?
I mean, there's just very little doubt in my mind that Butler, Pennsylvania was an inside job. If you look at all the errors and omissions, at some point you've got to say nobody could have allowed these things to happen unless it was intentional. And I very much do worry about our future president's safety. I want him to be able to take the oath of office on Monday and get him in the White House safely and securely, and then protect him. I do worry about that because you've got not only the people in Washington that hate him because they know that he's going to come after him. He's not going to go after him because he wants retaliation or being petty. But those people put this country through unmitigated hell. And they wasted your money and mine on multiple political witch hunts for the sole purpose of precluding Donald Trump from becoming president. And now that they've lost at every single turn, they're desperate. And they've got to know that they are going to be called to task for the dastardly deeds that they've done. So I have said for the better part of a year, let's take the moral high ground. Absolutely investigate, conduct trials, and have fair, impartial jurors determine the guilt or innocence of these people. And then, Mr. President, President Trump, pardon them. Bring the country together. Let's don't divide the country over bickering over whether it was fair or right to investigate and prosecute these people. So you just pardon them. But the truth is out. That's what I want. I want a cleansing of our federal government, which I have concluded is rotten to its core. The CIA has infiltrated every single department of the federal government. They have CIA personnel embedded even in the White House, in the Department of Defense, throughout the federal government. It's got to stop. A very respected, well-known national correspondent who lives in Washington, who lives in that environment, told me you can count on one hand the number of members of Congress, both houses, who are either not compromised or on the take. Now, I don't know whether that's true, but you look at all the rhetoric and all the vitriol that come out of both parties, and you say, great, way to fight. Where are the consequences?
Yeah.
They're none. All we do is bring them up there and belittle them on national television so you can look like a superhero and then do absolutely nothing. I think it's a sham. I really have come to the conclusion it is a sham.
A lot of people always, Trey Gowdy, never met him, don't have anything bad to say about him, other than whatever happened. I mean, he was a great prosecutor. He'd have Hillary Clinton up there. Hillary would scream, "What difference does it make?" And everybody's like, "Gotta get her, go get her, Trey." Nothing ever happened. Nothing ever happened. You look at Butler, Pennsylvania. They did all this investigation. They did all this. We know more about so many other things. We still don't know about that shooter in Butler, Pennsylvania. We don't know why a kid that cleaned bedpans at a nursing home had several phones. We don't know what the accountability was. Anybody ever disciplined, fired, cut loose? I don't even think they've announced a new Secret Service chief to take over under the new administration. I mean,
no, you still got Ronald Rutrow.
Yeah, you still got him, and hopefully he's fired on day one if he hasn't stepped down. It's really just bizarre that we just kind of go along with it. But Trey Gowdy or this Republican or Jim Comer, they made it look real good, but nothing ever happens. You have these show trials, but nothing ever happens. And they say, well, it's not our fault that didn't happen. Well, whose fault is it? Somebody's got to be held accountable. No one in D.C. gets held accountable.
You and I see it just identically. I was home from the fourth grade on November 22nd, 1963, when John Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. I have studied that assassination for literally 65 years. I have gotten my hands on everything that I could read, watched all the videos on YouTube and the documentaries and the 60-minute specials that have been played over the years. I consider myself pretty much an authority on the Kennedy assassination. I have concluded with 100% certainty in my own mind that Allen Dulles planned, orchestrated the assassination of the most popularly elected president of our lifetime up until that point. And that is wrong. It is as wrong as it gets. And then Lyndon Johnson, J. Edgar Hoover, and a whole cast of characters, including people that I really respected, like Richard Russell and Gerald Ford and the senator from Louisiana, Hale Boggs. They served on the Warren Commission. How did they let him get away with it? Richard Russell did not want to sign the Warren Commission final report. He told Lyndon Johnson he did not want to sign it. That is well documented. So our own federal government killed our democratically elected president. Now, roll the tape forward to July 13th, 2024 in Butler, Pennsylvania. The similarities are undeniable. In Dallas, the parade route was organized in a way that violated the Secret Service's own rules. It required a more than a 90-degree turn to go off of Elm Street onto Houston, or was it vice versa, Houston onto Elm. And the Secret Service rules required all windows to be shut and secured. They also had a minimum detail that had to be present for protection of the president. None of those things happened. The hairpin turn, the Secret Service detail was reduced that day, and the windows were allowed to remain open. I could go. We could talk until the cows come home about it, so I won't. But you look at Butler. You look at the protected area of that venue, and I've seen it. There is an absolute slice of a pie that was taken out of the circumference of the secure zone, and it was the AGR building. Then you've got Thomas Maxwell Crooks, who ostensibly was the would-be assassin, who went to the shooting range for 2 or 3 months prior to the attempt, and he was accompanied by somebody. But in the logs from the shooting range, that person's name is redacted. I want to know who it was. There are breadcrumbs from Galaxy Place in Washington to Michael Crooks's house in Pennsylvania. Cell phone breadcrumbs. I want to know who was it that traveled from Washington to Crooks's home 2 or 3 times leading up to July the 13th. Who was it? Then, last little factoid here. Maxwell Urich. He was a strange dude. He fought in the Ukraine. He had supposed alleged ties to the CIA. He showed up in Portland, Atlanta, D.C., all the hot spots of the 2019 riots. He is alleged to have had ties with Ralph. Ralph was the guy that was the attempted assassin in West Palm Beach. The closer you look, the spookier it gets. Now, Maxwell Urich had gauges that he had taken out of his ear. The ear healed, but it left a scar. You zoom in on the shooter on the AGR building, that person has a scar. He also appears to have a tattoo on his forearm. Crooks had no tattoos, but Maxwell Urich did. Now, here's where the Twilight Zone really gets going. Maxwell Urich's parents filed a missing persons report on him on July the 14th, 2024. We need to know who is Maxwell Urich, who traveled from Washington, D.C. to Crooks's house, who was going with him to the shooting range. I'm just telling you, it smells. It stinks to high heaven. And you watch this guy, Ron Rowe, when he testified in Congress a month ago and he got into a shouting match with a seated member of Congress and started talking about, you can't talk to me or question me because I served our country in the World Trade Center in 9/11. That's what you call a smoke screen. It's a pivot. It's a diversion. And, you know, I've been a lawyer for 45 years. I worked for the district attorney in Bibb County, Georgia at the beginning of my career. I know what it looks like when somebody's trying to be fast and loose with the facts.
Yeah.
We need a cleansing in America. All of it needs to come out. The January 6th facts need to come out. Liz Cheney's tampering with that witness who lied and said that Trump grabbed the wheel of the limousine after the rally on the ellipse that day. That turned out to be a lie. 3 Secret Service agents in the car said it didn't happen.
Yeah.
The Epstein files. I want it all.
Yeah.
Just give
Supposedly,
it to us.
President Trump said he will finally give us the JFK files. And the reason those JFK files are still locked up is because it does point to some alphabet soup agency. The actual players of this thing are long dead or in a home somewhere, or 1 foot in the grave, or both, the whole body's in the grave. But there's institutional information there about what happened there in JFK, and hopefully release it. The Epstein files, the Diddy files. So give me the Diddy files too. Let's see all these power players. Let's find out where all these people are at whenever various and the sundry things have been happening that have been very nasty and involve small children. That's why I think Mazie Hirono is asking these questions of these confirmation hearings. She might want to go around to the U.S. Senate and ask all of her colleagues there that have had millions and millions of dollars of slush funds for years in Congress paying off sexual harassment charges. She might want to ask those dirty questions to her own colleagues, because she's probably sitting around with a lot of perverts up there.
I think the number is $15 million that our taxpayers have forked over
15 to 17, somewhere in that range,
to basically cover up allegations of sexual misconduct by members of Congress. It is just, it's got to stop. And look, the fact of the matter is, I'm kind of a libertarian. What somebody does in their own life, I really don't care. Now that's going to upset some of my friends that are very devout, hardcore Christians, and I get it. I do try to live a Christian life. I work really hard to follow the 10 Commandments. I'm not perfect. I'm not saying I am. I'm not trying to paint a picture here. But what I am saying is that, Jimmy, what you do in your life, as long as you're not harming someone, I don't really care. You get to decide that, but so does your maker, okay?
Yeah.
You want to condemn yourself to a life, an eternal life in hell? I think it's your choice. You want to shoot up with heroin? You want to become a heroin addict or a drug addict? Go to it. I'm not talking about you, Jimmy. I'm just talking you understand I'm talking hyperbole. But to the average person, if you want to do that, go for it. Just don't come to me for methadone treatment.
Yeah.
Don't become a ward of the state then.
The voice of John Gordon. John, you have your own program. It's called The Truth with John Gordon. How do folks follow you and get to watch your program?
Well, we're on the John Fredericks Radio Network every Saturday from 12 to 2, and then Sunday 1 to 3. You can go to John Fredericks' website and watch and listen to us on the live stream, or you can listen on the radio in Memphis, Nashville, Atlanta, Richmond, Norfolk, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and Morgantown, West Virginia. We're also on Getter, Rumble, YouTube Live, and X. So you got a lot of options there. I wish you'd come and listen. And if you like it, please subscribe. It really would help us. And we really are grateful for the opportunity we have to inform, and it keeps my head in the game. That's the benefit for me.
Host of The Truth with John Gordon. Check it out. John, appreciate you, my friend. Next time we talk, we will have a new administration. A new sheriff will be in town in Washington, D.C. And from your lips, my lips, to God's ears, let's hope that he gets to do all the things that we hope he gets to do.
It's now my pleasure and honor to welcome back to The Truth John Eastman. He may be the nation's foremost constitutional lawyer. He taught law in California. Worse, though, he tried to bring truth and light to the 2020 election. And now he's had to pay a price. John Eastman, welcome to The Truth.
John, thanks for having me back on. I always enjoy doing your program.
Well, you're so kind, and we enjoy having you on too. So after 2020, you went to Georgia, and I believe you testified before the Senate committee on the 2020, looking at the 2020 election. Similarly, in Arizona, what was your alleged misconduct there?
Well, in Arizona, I don't quite know why I'm on the indictment list there, because I didn't have anything to do with any of the election challenges. I didn't have anything to do with any discussions with the electors. At the request of one of the state legislators, I took a call with the Speaker of the Assembly and told them that if there was illegality in the election, their rules weren't followed. They had authority to look at that. And that was it. But that was apparently enough to add me to the indictment list in Arizona.
So you basically testified before the Georgia State Senate Committee, the Judiciary Committee, headed by uh, William
Ligon.
Ligon. Thank you. Actually, a friend of mine from Brunswick, Georgia, who looked at the 2020 election, and you and Rudy Giuliani and others were there. You had a lesser role in Arizona, and what happened as a consequence of those interactions?
Well, I'm on indicted in both. Co-conspirator number two in or number three in Georgia. Trump is one, Rudy's number two, and I'm number three. And then indicted co-conspirator alleged in Arizona, number 13. That's because they put all the electors first, and then Rudy, and then me. And I was unindicted co-conspirator number two in the Jack Smith case against President Trump in D.C. Again, all for raising questions about illegality that occurred in the 2020 election and trying to
As a
develop
lawyer,
constitution. Yeah, as a lawyer,
as a
recommending
lawyer.
strategies to try and get the election illegalities addressed by the courts.
So, as you know, you and I first became acquainted with one another because I worked on the case of Jefferson Satira versus the Fulton Board of Elections with Bob Shealy, who is also one of the defendants, one of your co-defendants in the Fani Willis 19 fiasco. And I've seen the evidence. I've played devil's advocate with the forensic accountants, and I've watched the videos from the State Farm Arena. How is this even possible, John? It is mind-boggling to me. You see the people working the tabulating machines taking the same stack of roughly 100 ballots and feeding them through the tabulators multiple times. In one case, 32 times. Yet they get a verdict against Rudy Giuliani for defamation to the tune of $148 million and basically ruin his life. New York took his bar license. They tried to get his property. I just read today that he entered a settlement agreement with them yesterday. I don't know whether you have any insight into that or not, but I want to talk about all that. But first of all, just how does this happen in America today? I mean, it's just scandalous to me that this could even happen.
Well, one of the problems, and I think the defamation case was brought in the District of Columbia.
Yeah.
One of the problems is you don't get a fair jury pool in a jurisdiction that is so hyper partisan, unbalanced one direction rather than the other. I think 95% of the people in the District of Columbia are not just Democrats, but violently anti-Trump Democrats. And so you're not going to get a fair trial. And, so I think that's one of the problems. The other problem is facts seem not to matter. Look, the illegality that was clear cut in the Fulton County arena, the State Farm Arena in Fulton County, was that they sent people home. And then they continued to process the ballots after people had been sent home.
A violation
Now,
of state law.
You can process ballots if people aren't there to observe, as long as you've given them notice of when you're going to be processing the ballots. And sending them home, telling them that we're going to reconvene at 8:30 the next morning. And the governor and the Secretary of State's claims that they weren't sent home, that they just left because other people were leaving, is false. We've got sworn affidavits that said they were told that counting was stopping for the night to go home and they would reconvene at 8:30 the next morning. Sworn affidavits. And you can see it happening on the video. When they continued to process after the observers had been sent home, that was a violation of state law. Whether those ballots were fraudulent that were pulled from under the table in a ballot bin on wheels, some state officials even call those suitcases. So whether it's a suitcase or a ballot bin, it's immaterial. They were, and whether the ballots in those bins were valid ballots or fraudulent ballots, we'll never know because the observers weren't there. The whole point of having observers there is to make sure nothing untoward goes on. And then you've got, you're absolutely right, the multiple scannings. And of course, their claim is that, well, that was because of a jam. Now, we've not been able to connect the dots on that, but Garland Favorito's litigation, which is still pending, and they were given a forensic audit access to one of the machines, and they have proved that in fact ballots in batches of 100 were counted multiple times. And how do we know that? Because in Fulton County, all of the precincts were counted in that one facility. And when you put randomly those 490 precincts in a batch of 100, the odds that that batch are identically replicated in that exact precinct order in any two batches is like, one in a trillion. I mean, it's 100 to the 490th power. Impossible. And they found in 1 week of a forensic audit on one machine, 5,000 ballots that had been scanned and counted multiple times. Now, whether that was the video that we see the multiple scannings going on at State Farm Arena, we don't know because they didn't get the timestamps on when that occurred. But the fact that ballots were scanned multiple times or replicated inside the software multiple times and counted was proven in that case. And yet, if you raise that question, you're going to be targeted for challenging the government's narrative.
That was just the tip of the iceberg. You've got four pretty credible witnesses: Susie Voiles, Scott Hall, Bridget Thorne, Robin Satir, who each independently testified that they saw a pallet full of pristine ballots that appeared to be untouched by the human hand, that all were scored identically. And of course, for Joe Biden, and a pallet full, estimate it, maybe call it 20,000 ballots. What about that little factoid? And then the fact that there were people registered at UPS addresses, homeless shelters, vacant apartment buildings. I mean, Joe Rossi and David Cross, two numbers guys, not working together, both concluded that there were 40,000 illegal votes in Fulton County, 400,000 illegal votes in Georgia combined. Now, I know there's no reason to litigate 2020. Nothing is going to change by that. But there are two salient points. One, we don't ever want it to happen again. It is what makes our country a republic. It is sacred to our democracy. Two, they're still persecuting you.
Yep.
Donald Trump won. They haven't gotten the memo. Tell us what's going on.
Well, and we take this issue up in the documentary that Madison Media Fund just produced, and we premiered at Mar-a-Lago on January 4th, and President Trump and Italian Prime Minister Gloria Meloni came along with Senator Marco Rubio to watch it with us. It was great fun. But this is the thing, even if we were wrong about the fact claims and the law claims, the notion that shining a light on illegality in the conduct of an election is somehow a part of a criminal racketeering enterprise conspiracy, which is what the Fulton County indictment against all of us says. It's just utter nonsense. It's a weaponization of our criminal justice system, weaponization on steroids, lawfare on steroids, if you will. And the fact that there is all of this still lingering evidence confirming that we were right to at least raise questions about what went on should mean that these criminal cases should never have been brought and that they ought to be dismissed. And quite frankly, the people that were responsible for bringing them ought to be charged with malicious prosecution.
I think that if there's a conspiracy, it's among them. The people that are claiming foul are the ones that are doing foul. And Judge Brian Amaro in that case, and Favorito and the case I referenced are actually one and the same, but the parties have different lawyers. But Judge Brian Amaro ruled that the petitioners had demonstrated a prima facie case. Now, why is that not significant? Why does that not completely absolve you and the other 18 defendants? Number two, he ordered the absentee ballots be unsealed and provided for the petitioners to be able to examine them. We think that's where the smoking gun really lies. But of course, they've never been allowed to look at the absentee ballots. And I suspect that those ballots no longer exist. I would think that that would likewise be exculpatory for each of the defendants, or at least render the cases moot if evidence has been destroyed. So how do they get away with this? And who was the puppet master? That's what I want to know. Who was pulling the strings?
Well, there's a lot of money rolling in. We just learned last month, for example, in the Arizona criminal litigation, that the Attorney General of Arizona, a rabid Democrat advocate, she campaigned on saying, "I'm going to get these people for raising questions about election integrity because it's undermining our democracy." That was her campaign. She may well have stolen the election. There were certainly allegations to that effect. But she hired a violently anti-Trump nonpartisan NGO, non-governmental organization called States United Democracy Center to prepare the prosecution strategy for her. It just boggles the mind. That's like hiring a fox to develop your safety manual for your chicken coop. I mean, it's utter nonsense. And yet, and they're well funded. One suspects from many of the George Soros front organizations or what have you. They're well funded. Their mission is to bring these bar complaints against people all over the country. Their sister organization called the 65 Project actually said our goal is not just to get all the attorneys disbarred, but to make them so toxic in their firms and their communities that lawyers won't ever want to take on these kind of cases again. In other words, they want to destroy the adversarial system of justice by scaring lawyers from taking on clients or causes that the deep state, the entrenched bureaucracy, whatever you want to call it, doesn't want to have. And by the way, this played out in this week's confirmation hearings as well. One of the questions from, I think it was Dick Durbin of Pam Bondi, designated for become the next Attorney General, was, do you defend Trump's claim on the call with Brad Raffensperger that, go find me 11,780 votes so I win this election? They continue to do this false narrative. Of course, Trump said that, but it was only after this first sentence where he said, we've identified about 150,000 ballots. All you have to do is find 11,780 of them, and I win this election. And so, the Washington Post had to do a retraction on its false story initially, and yet the Democrats continue with this false narrative, this propaganda to try and it's the big lie. If they repeat it often enough, then they think a lot of people will then start to think it's true. And it is blatantly false. And yet those that point out the falsity, that raise question, it's Orwellian. If you don't repeat the lie that 2 + 2 is 5, and then come to believe the lie that 2 + 2 is 5, we're going to utterly destroy you. And that's what's going on here. It is an authoritarian, tyrannical type of government move that one should never have expected to see in the United States of America. And that's one of the reasons why I'm standing up and fighting so hard against this stuff, because the consequences of losing this battle are far beyond whether I keep my bar license or even whether I stay out of prison in Georgia or Arizona or not. The very ability to be free people in this country is at stake if we don't put an end to this lawfare and this propaganda machine coming out of our way too big central government in Washington, D.C.
I watched the confirmation hearing with Pam Bondi earlier this week as well. And I guess that's the same hearing that you were talking about with Dick Durbin. And Adam Schiff said, are you prepared to say that 2020 was that Joe Biden won that election free and fairly? And Pam Bondi said that she was not going to engage in a conversation that was laden with gotcha questions. Now, can you please help me understand why pushing back against Adam Schiff when he said that is a gotcha question? I mean, let's suppose that she had said, oh, no, I don't believe 2020 was a free and fair election at all. Where is the gotcha in that? Are they going to use that as a means to disqualify her for attorney general? And on what grounds? I can't imagine anybody but the Democrats that would oppose her if she had said that.
Well, but you got to understand, the Democrats, they would oppose her. They would give them the reason to oppose her, and it would be a great appeal to their base for more fundraising. That where Trump is elected or nominated an election denier for attorney general, and so therefore we can expect to see the abuse of the Department of Justice to go after people that were simply certifying valid and free and fair elections. This is the narrative. right? This is the narrative. It's the most extraordinary example of psychiatric transference or projection that we've probably ever seen in history. The claims that it's Trump that is going to weaponize the Department of Justice, when Trump himself and people like me and Rudy have been on the receiving end of the most egregious weaponization of our Department of Justice for the last 4 years.
Well, I have been a student of the Kennedy assassination for 65 years. As bad as the assassination was, the cover up that ensued afterwards was equally bad because, obviously the assassination cost our president his life, but the cover up cost 60 people their lives, like Dorothy Kilgallen, who went and interviewed Jack Ruby in prison and came back and called her friend Mary Smith and said, read the paper this week. I'm going to blow the lid off the Kennedy assassination. And she woke up dead the next morning. And it goes on and on and on. I won't get bogged down on it. But my point is very simply that I called 2020 JFK 2.0 because I think the deep state killed Kennedy, Allen Dulles, Johnson, Hoover, the deep state of the time. I think the deep state politically attempted to assassinate Trump in the 2020 election. And they did prevent him from taking a second term then. But what they did subsequently, everything they did backfired. They are so incompetent and so stupid that they lack the capacity to see that the things that they do actually result in the opposite consequence that they had hoped for. And the mystifying thing is they keep doing it. Like, oh, well, I didn't perfect it the first 3 times, so I'm going to try it again. And they keep getting the similar result.
Their view is that they didn't put enough effort into it. So if they only put more effort into it next time, it'll succeed. By the way, a little story. I haven't followed the Kennedy assassination stuff other than kind of on the periphery. But I was a college student working at summer at the Eastman Kodak Film Lab in Dallas. I went to college at the University of Dallas, and my dad had worked for Eastman Kodak his whole life. And so one of their employee benefits is summer jobs for the employees' kids. And so I was working in the film lab in the late 1970s when I was in college, and a lot of the people that were in the lab, the older folks, had been there in 1963. And they told me stories about the processing of the Zapruder film, and that it was crystal clear when it came off the processing line, and they don't understand what happened to it, that it's so fuzzy and what have you since. So maybe just another little piece in the puzzle of the conspiracy, if there was one.
Well,
I also saw a recent account that one of the reasons they wanted to shut down they came up with the magic bullet theory is because there may have been a friendly fire problem with a young and overly nervous Secret Service agent in the front seat that accidentally shot it. And that information came out in the 1970s, but we didn't really hear much about it.
I've read that extensively. I happen to discount that particular iteration, but the fact of the matter is that, we could spend the rest of the day talking about the Kennedy assassination. My listeners are sick of hearing about it because I've been talking about it for 3 years. But the reason that I continue to talk about it is because I feel that it is emblematic of just how bad the deep state is in this country. And that's something that's just right in your face. What are they doing that we don't know about? And I've called for a cleansing in America. I think all the secrets have to come out. The Kennedy assassination, the Epstein files, the J6 files, the 2020 election files. I think we need to get it all out there, and that if we're ever going to have the moral authority to lead the world, we cannot be bad actors. And I fear that many, many people in our federal government are just absolutely rotten to the core. In fact, I had a very prominent longtime Washington journalist tell me that you can count on both hands the number of congressmen and senators that are either not corrupt or compromised. And I very much have this perception, the suspicion that that is true. and that explains why we continue to pass continuing resolutions and we can't get budget reform, and that when we send billions upon billions of dollars to the Ukraine, which very few people in America support, that it's somebody else that's calling the shots and not our elected representatives. And so I'm concerned about it. I know that sounds very conspiratorialist from a lot of people, but I've watched this stuff, I study it, and I watch people and their behavior and the events that follow. And we were having a conversation earlier today with a guest, and we talked about the rhetoric that comes out of Senate and congressional hearings. And it's very invigorating when they get up there and they nail a witness and they put them under pressure, like Christopher Wray, when the congressman from Texas said how many confidential human sources were there in the Capitol on January the 6th. And he said none. And then the Michael Horowitz report comes out, the inspector general's, that reports that there were as many as 26. So we know that Christopher Wray lied. Now that makes me very suspicious when the head of the FBI perjures himself before Congress with no consequence.
Without any accountability or consequence.
None.
You know, Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro went to prison for refusing to comply with a congressional subpoena because they were going to violate executive privilege. And yet people that blatantly lie, and you go back to Eric Holder, that blatantly lie, he lied about, as far as I can tell, about the what was the guns to drug dealers scandal, lied about that, and no consequence. So if you're on the side of the entrenched bureaucracy or deep state, they'll cover for you. If you dare to raise questions about it or challenge it, you're going to get destroyed. This is intolerable, and I think one of the reasons why they're pulling all the stops out to stop Trump, to stop his nominees right now, because Trump learned in the first administration how deep this problem really is. These guys have been there so long, they think that the president works for them rather than the other way around. There was a wonderful, interesting story in the New York Times back in December of 2020, after Bill Barr had stepped down as Attorney General, and Trump was looking at naming Jeff Clark as acting Attorney General. And the New York Times had this story about how scandalous that was, that Trump would pick who he wanted to be Attorney General. Or there was another story about that Trump wanted to do things that was contrary to the opinions of the intelligence community. It's like, well, excuse me, the intelligence community works for him. He's the guy we elected, not these unelected bureaucrats, unnamed, unelected, anonymous bureaucrats. But they actually think that the president is there to do their bidding rather than them there to follow the agenda and the orders of the president.
Well, who can blame them for thinking that way? Because they've had Joe Biden for 4 years, and I think that's exactly the model that they've followed, and probably not terribly unlike George W. Bush, who was told that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq that led to a 12-year war. And you talk about the guns for money to fund covert activities. So, I mean, there's a long precedent for that. But before we move on, just the sheer hypocrisy of sending Bannon and Navarro to prison for refusing what really was an illegitimate subpoena issued by Congress, because the committee was not constituted legitimately. So I would argue that they couldn't issue a subpoena if the committee was illegitimate to begin with. But Merrick Garland was guilty of the same thing that he prosecuted Navarro and Bannon for.
Yeah, I know.
How duplicitous can one person be?
Well, and look, I mean, for the first time in the history of the Congress, that committee took the position that if you asserted a privilege, they would not go to court to file a motion to compel your testimony and then have a neutral court address the privilege claim. They would decide the validity of the privilege claim themselves. They'd meet for 5 minutes, they'd vote unanimously to reject your privilege claim and then come back. And then if you didn't answer, you're in criminal contempt of Congress. They tried to do the same thing with me, not just on my attorney-client privilege claims, and they were going to decide those claims on their own. And then I would be left in the position, if they say, well, we reject your attorney-client privilege claim, If I answer the questions then in breach of my obligation to my clients, in violation of attorney-client privilege, I get disbarred. If I don't answer the question, I get criminal contempt of Congress. I mean, this is the nonsensical game they played with this. I agree with you, illegitimate committee. It was not constituted according to the rules of the House. There was no minority ranking member because Liz Cheney was appointed as the vice chair, not by the Republican caucus. And the rules of the House require that before you issue subpoenas, both the majority and the minority ranking member had to sign off on it. There was no such person. So, and beyond that, it was clearly not a legislative function committee. Their whole goal, and they told us this over and over again, was to develop a criminal case against President Trump. That's an illegitimate role for Congress. It violates separation of powers. It violates due process and the Fourth Amendment because they were issuing subpoenas not based on probable cause, not with a warrant signed by a neutral judge. They were just issuing themselves. And they were general warrants. Give us everything you've got in your emails and your phone communications, and we'll look through them to see if we can find something that we can distort to use against you. This is the very reason we have a Fourth Amendment. It's one of the reasons why we fought a Revolutionary War, is to prevent that kind of behavior. And yet this committee did it from the legislative halls, not even from an executive branch law enforcement agency. So, I mean, the abuses of our constitutional system were just rampant.
Well, it is dire, and I've got 3 minutes and three questions I want to touch on real quick, kind of in follow up to what you were just saying. But Trump is going to be inaugurated just 2 days from when this broadcast airs. Do you feel that he is going to be able to get to Washington safely and be inaugurated without any further attempts on his life? I'll just tell you, I'm concerned, and I'm concerned because they have tried everything. There have been 2 assassination attempts. Newsmax just ran a story yesterday that said that Trump was not out of the woods and they were concerned that he was in danger. I fear for his safety because I think the deep state, if he gets to be president on Monday, has got a lot of atoning to do. What do you think, John?
Well, I share your concerns. My own experience with the rank and file members of the Secret Service at Mar-a-Lago when we did our premiere there is that they are doing a good job protecting his home in Mar-a-Lago. They've got from Mar-a-Lago north all blocked off on Ocean Drive. They've got very serious security to get into the place. So that I'm encouraged by that. But there were also some unbelievable failures, and they're so unbelievable that one wonders whether in fact it was part of a deliberate effort.
Absolutely. And I live right across from Mar-a-Lago. I know every time Trump leaves and goes because I see the commotion that it stirs. And proximate to when Routh tried to assassinate Trump at his golf course, I had watched the motorcade go by. There were no less than 50 motorcycle policemen in the motorcade. From Palm Beach County, from the sheriff's office, from Broward County, from the state patrol. It was a spectacle. And it's to me, it said, look at the lengths that we're going to protect Donald Trump. Meanwhile, my producer's sitting right over here. He and I were doing a show on that Sunday. I think it was August the 14th or thereabouts. It was a month and a day after Butler. And the word went out that there had been a second attempt. We jumped in the car and went out there. And I spent 3 hours walking around the Trump golf course and the perimeter. And we attended the press conference with the sheriff and the FBI and the Secret Service. The thing that stuck out to me was I've never been trained. I have no experience in protection of a high value asset. But it was so obvious to me that you could have protected that entire perimeter by putting a cop on the corner of Summit and Congress, one at the north corner and one at the west corner. You would have had the entire exposed part of the golf course covered. The rest of the golf course, the sheriff office and the jail is on the northern part, and the western part is surrounded by a swamp and woods. It would be virtually impenetrable, and the golf course didn't go up to the fence line there. But where the president was exposed, you could have put three people there with radios and binoculars. No one would have been able to have gotten through that perimeter. Now, why do they have 50 motorcycle cops who provide very little value other than show, but deprive the president the protection of the perimeter, which I think is asset protection 101?
Yeah. Yeah, no, you and several others with actual Secret Service experience have been raising similar questions. So,
Now,
yes, I
will
fear
say
and I
this.
keep the.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. But I just wanted to add that, like yourself, I've spent a lot of time at Mar-a-Lago. I know many of the Secret Service people in his detail, and I am telling you that they are fine, devoted, dedicated people. They're not the issue. It's the people up there in Washington in the ivory tower that are designing the perimeters and calling the shots. That's where the problem is. And I've been, like yourself, I haven't practiced as much law as you have, but I have been a member of the bar since 1979. I did work for the DA at the beginning of my career, and I know when a witness is trying to dodge a question. And you watch Ronald Rutrow in that embarrassing performance before the United States Congress when he got into a shouting match with a duly elected member of Congress and started talking about his experience defending the country in 9/11. What's that got to do with Butler, Pennsylvania, sir? I'm sorry. You're pivoting. You're throwing up a smokescreen. Answer the damn question. And so that all just fuels my suspicion. I'm sorry.
Well, and I will say this, millions and millions of Americans that share concerns about what the deep state wants to do to prevent Trump from taking office are millions of prayers are are coming in, and I think the avoidance of an assassination at Butler was miraculous.
Divine
and
intervention.
The other piece I'll point out is I believe even if they were to accomplish such a mission, which I hope never occurs, J.D. Vance seems equally committed to shining a light on what's going on in the deep state, and they wouldn't buy much at all.
And I think
and
he's
the
every
people
bit
that
as
will be coming in to take charge and to shine this light on the rats and the bugs. And now, the other thing that's going on in these final days of the Biden administration, they're converting political appointees to careers positions. That's not supposed to happen. You're not supposed to be able to embed your politicos in to deprive the incoming administration of their own politicos. But I saw just a couple of days ago over at Department of Labor, they took a civil service position that's for a full term, a permanent position, and they altered it to a 3-year term so that they claim it avoids the anti-embedding law because it wasn't a permanent. We didn't put in somebody permanent. I think Trump needs to reverse in day one a lot of these recent egregious attempts to embed a deep state that's hostile to the administration that's coming in, and therefore hostile to the American people who elected Trump to take certain actions and pursue a certain agenda. I mean, this is, they keep saying, Trump was anti-democratic because he challenged the results of the election. This is a thumb in the nose, stick in the eye, whatever you want to call it, to the American people who'd had enough about lawfare, who'd had enough about what our government has been doing without our consent, and elected somebody based on a platform of doing something about it. And they're trying to obstruct the agenda that we, the American people, the first 3 words of the Constitution, overwhelmingly voted for. And I hope the incoming FBI director and the incoming attorney general and the incoming head of criminal division and the incoming head of the civil rights division and others understand that this is unconstitutional and illegal behavior. It's federal felonies, in my view, that they fully investigate it, and where warranted, they bring criminal charges against the people that are engaging in this assault on our Constitution.
So Donald Trump won by 77 million votes, or with 77 million votes, I should say. And Fonnie Willis has been determined by the Supreme Court of Georgia to be disqualified from, the Court of Appeals of Georgia, disqualified from being able to continue as the prosecutor in the case against you and the 18 others. So your legal problems are over. You're home
Yeah.
free, right?
I certainly am looking forward to a future unburdened by what has been in the recent past. But no, Fannie Willis was disqualified by the Court of Appeals. She immediately appealed to the Georgia Supreme Court. But even if the Georgia Supreme Court upholds her disqualification, the matter goes before the prosecuting attorney's council, and they will appoint another prosecutor. And the DeKalb County DA has already volunteered to take it over. She's chomping at the bit to get that case and try and make her career on the Democrat side of the aisle by pursuing this case. And, you know, they can't go against Trump now. That would violate supremacy clause while he's in office. So I think they'll go after the others, and me included, as a way to say, well, we got their scalps, and that just proves we could have gotten Trump's scalp if the American people hadn't been so foolish as to reelect him. I think that will be their strategy and their narrative going forward.
So let me ask you this: if with the disqualification of Fonnie Willis, can't you make a very good legal argument that the indictment has to be thrown out too? I mean, if she was had a conflict of interest while she was prosecuting the case, doesn't it logically follow that she had a conflict of interest when she was bringing the indictment, and that should be tossed and they'd have to start all over from scratch?
When she was presenting it to the grand jury, I think it's a very good argument. And one suspects that that might be part of the legal strategy going forward by either me or my co-defendants, but I don't want to get in too much of the strategy there. But I agree with you. Look, you know, if she's got a conflict of interest, then that ought to infect the presentation to the grand jury, because we all know grand juries are heavily influenced by the way the case is presented to them by the district attorney, or in Arizona by the attorney general.
So the amazing thing to me is that it doesn't sound like these people have gotten the memo yet. I mean, Trump won in a landslide, and largely because of the mistreatment that he received through the administration of lawfare against him. And now it sounds like they're continuing to double down on the very things that caused them to lose the election. So I guess we should be glad that they're incompetent, but I'm sorry for you that you're having to go through the process of defending yourself and hiring lawyers. It's got to be an awfully difficult burden to maintain, particularly when you know, and I know, that what you were doing was being truthful, honest, and an advocate, and actually a very fine, patriotic American. That should be
thank you.
celebrated,
People need
not
to watch this.
prosecuted.
People need to watch this movie. It's called The Eastman Dilemma: Lawfare or Justice, and it's available for free streaming temporarily until it goes up on one of the paid platforms at madisonmediafund.org. And if they want to keep up with the kind of things that we're dealing with, they can visit givesendgo.com/Eastman. We use that as a blog to let people know what's going on. If they are so inclined and want to help with the legal fees, it's a legal defense fund donation site. They can also send prayers, which are heartwarming. My wife and I read them. And so givesendgo.com/Eastman. But watch the movie at madisonmediafund.org. And I think you'll come away quite impressed with what we're dealing with and angry about it, and will join us in trying to do something about it.
Well, I will look forward to watching that movie personally this weekend. And full disclosure, I have donated to your legal defense fund. I am squarely in your corner. I wish I had more capacity and a bigger megaphone to help, but we all just do what we can. And so I encourage our listeners, if you believe, as I do, that John Eastman's gotten a raw deal, just like Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro and a host of others, like Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani, we all have to push back. We have to stand up. We have to do what we can to help these warriors. Send them a buck. Won't hurt. But it'll do an awful lot of good if enough of you do it. So I will certainly do what little more I can do. And thank you, John Eastman, for the sacrifices you've made for our country.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you for your support and your very kind words. I appreciate it.
All right. Very good. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Let me know if there's anything I can do. And anytime you want to
Well,
come on, if
we're
you,
gonna do another showing down there with the 47 Club
oh,
at
good.
some point, and so I will make sure that we let you know about it.
It's my pleasure to welcome back to The Truth Senator Colton Moore, a state senator from the state of Georgia. And he's gotten on the bad side of John Burns, the Speaker of the House. Well, let me tell you, the Speaker of the House has gotten on my bad side, so watch out. All right, Colton Moore, take us through it. It all started about a year ago when a resolution came to the Georgia on the floor of the Georgia State Senate honoring the late David Ralston, the former Speaker of the House of Georgia, and you weren't too keen on that, and you chose to uh, really do your job and go to the Senate well.
And with
And speak.
the resolution was to name a building after David Wilson. I have constituents who go to the college that this building was going to be named after. We got to think about David Ralston for a second. We started learning about all of his sins against humanity in a sense when there was a 14-year-old girl who at like 19 years old had become terminally ill, and the accused in the case had never went to trial because the molester in the case had hired David Ralston, who was using a law that he had created to continue cases. So he was taking on all these big bad criminals, and then no justice was ever being served because he was using a legislative leave provision in which he had created. There were thousands of case delays. This was investigated by retired FBI agent Derek Somerville. It was such a mess at the time. I was in the House of Representatives, was one of the 10 who had signed on to the resolution asking for the speaker to resign at that point. And I thought all of that was over, right? He passed away. We didn't have to open up those wounds anymore. And one day I'm sitting in the Senate, John, and the majority leader makes a motion to suspend the rules so that a resolution can advance through the process faster than it normally would. And the next day we could vote to name this building after David Ralston.
And who was the majority leader at that time?
Majority leader, right? Still is.
Who?
Steve Gooch, right? And Steve Gooch was the senator from Ralston's district, naturally. So I objected. And the lieutenant governor was like, oh, man, I don't know if I want to even recognize this objection. So I had to yell it out really loud. And I said, make sure that my objection is recorded on suspending the rules so that this resolution is, because I knew the next day the speaker's family was going to be coming over to the House chamber to be recognized at David Ralston's official portrait. So Gooch wanted to make sure that the Senate was doing something on the same day. And that's why he said, well, hey, let's just name this building after David Ralston. Okay, so then the Senate forces me to be put into this position to have to debate this issue in front of David Ralston's family. So then obviously Burns, that's what he says really upsets him. But I think there's a lot more to it than that. I think that's a quick political talking point that he uses. I mean, you got to think about this. Impeachment articles of impeachment were on his desk for about a year against Fonnie Willis, but he never took those up. I gave him a lot of grief for bringing a man dressed as a woman to do the invocation at the General Assembly, which, in my opinion, has no basis in religion at all. And obviously, he's got a grudge against me. Okay, so he said Colton is never allowed back onto the House floor again. And when I read the House rules, it kind of does say that the Speaker of the House can control who comes on and off of that floor. So I never challenged it. I never walked over there to the House floor. And then here we come into this General Assembly and we pass a resolution by the House, and then the Senate adopts it. And adopting it means they take the exact language coming from the House and they agree to it. It's unanimously decided by both chambers, creating a joint session of the General Assembly, right? So therefore, for the State of the State address, I now have a constitutional obligation. I'm compelled by law and the Constitution to attend the joint session, right? The purpose of that in government is the executive branch. The governor is there to explain what's going to go on and what is happening in the state of Georgia at the beginning of a legislative session, so those legislators know what to vote on and what to propose going forward. That's my obligation to be there so I can get caught up and on track with what the State of the State address is. So as I walk in, Guess what? They've got about 18 state troopers out there, John, to stop me from entering, taking orders from the doorkeeper who says he's taking orders from the speaker. And then the attorney for the Speaker of the House, the general counsel, this Keith Williams, he comes out and just body slams me essentially onto the floor. And then I'm getting arrested for obstruction of an officer. And all I'm trying to do is my constitutional duty, which is enter onto the House floor. So I miss the state of the state, but I'm living in a state of tyranny. So are my constituents in Northwest Georgia, because what type of world do we live in when an attorney for the Speaker of the House can push a sitting senator, a member of the Republic, to the ground and the senator get arrested for it?
So let's back up a little bit. David Ralston, when he was a state legislator, I believe it was when he was a legislator and not the Speaker of the House, introduced legislation that effectively said that if you were representing a client in a court in Georgia and your legislative duties required you not to be able to prevented you from being able to make an appearance in court, that gave you an automatic excuse and a delay of the case. And so David Ralston,
to be more clear there, he was the chairman of Judiciary at the time, and he actually slipped this in during a conference committee of the House and the Senate. So the legislation had already been created, and then there's this smaller committee that basically kind of irons out differences between the House and the Senate, and a conference committee, which is appointed by both presidents of both chambers. So he was on that conference committee. That's where he slid this language in that he personally wrote that basically gave him this ability.
So then he used that law that he helped write to subsequently get delays in not one, not two, not three, but many
thousands
cases in which he represented the defendant or, the defendant either civilly or criminally, I assume. So on its face, it sounds reasonable enough that if you are a legislator and you have to make an appearance in court and your legislative duty requires you to be in Atlanta and you can't attend the court proceeding, that you could get a excuse and a delay in the case. But it wasn't just a one-off. This was an habitual practice that he then engaged in. And I remember reading an Atlanta Journal-Constitution article while he was still Speaker of the House, effectively outing him. And it was a very critical article that showed how he was abusing this law that he wrote. And the consequence of that really is that a lot of victims were never able to really get justice, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, I called him the most corrupt elected official in modern Georgia history. And that's how I would describe it, because any man who holds that type of power, right? There is only one Speaker of the House in the state of Georgia. What a tremendous amount of power that one person possesses. And then to use that in a way that is contrary to justice, it's extremely corrupt. Extremely
contrary to justice, but it also served to enrich him.
That's correct.
He was able to collect a lot of legal fees, and the
money
longer he could keep a case going, the more fees he would collect.
Right.
And the defendant is happy because he's not being sent off to prison or socked with a judgment. And David Ralston's happy because he's collecting fees, and the judge just goes ho hum and looks the other way, I guess. I mean, and so you had the courage to stand up for your beliefs. And so when you object to a suspension of the rules, what is the rule in the Senate? How many people would have to vote along with you to
a simple majority? But no
a simple majority?
Yeah, but
and
no
so
one did.
Did the lieutenant governor call for a vote on your motion to oppose?
I think he might have just called for a raising of the hands and just said, well, it's, there's no sense in putting the numbers on the board, and he has that ability as the president.
Well, did anybody else object? Did anybody raise their hand along with yourself?
No, absolutely not. No.
And so you went to the well of the Senate the following day, and I've watched it several times. You spoke from the heart. I can't find one thing that you said that is factually incorrect.
That's correct. And that's what was so ironic about, say, the AJC. They wanted to be critical about it. And it's like, well, everything that I just said, you guys reported in your newspaper, but now you want to do the bidding of the leadership establishment. So now you want to be critical of me, but I'm just regurgitating what you reported in your paper, many years ago.
And so after you finished, well, you didn't really finish. Burt Jones interrupted you and really wouldn't permit you to finish, but you did the gentlemanly thing and stepped down from the well. And what was the vote then in the Senate? Was a vote called?
Vote was called, yeah, and I was the only one to vote no. Now, John, this is one of the sadder things about politics. I had 5 other senators come to me, some patting me on the back and saying, Colton, you were absolutely right. That guy was one corrupt SOB, but we would have never went up there and given a speech like that. And that's their prerogative. I wish they would have at least voted no. But
maybe they were smarter than you, because I say that tongue in cheek, because you've taken a lot of flack and you're still taking flack for it. And, that's nothing new in human nature and the way the world works. There are a lot of people throughout the history of our country who have been willing to stand for the truth and have been punished for that. And it seems to me that is exactly what's happening to you right now. So yesterday you attempted to fulfill your oath of office and attend the joint session, and you've explained how they blocked you from coming in. I saw you were body slammed by that guy. I don't know if you've seen my YouTube video that I posted earlier this morning, but I called for the resignation of John Burns, as have others like David Cross, the second vice president of the Georgia GOP, and Mallory Staples, and Sally Grubbs, the chairman of the Cobb County GOP, has said that her telephone will not quit ringing and that she has not spoken to a single person who doesn't say that it's time for Burns to step down or to be removed from office. So what are your colleagues telling you now? And how are you feeling about it? Did you, and they haul you off to jail?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I went to the Fulton County Jail and was treated like any other inmate. Was strip searched and mug shotted. And, I went through the entire process on Rice Street as any other criminal would. And, I had to give up my liberties yesterday in defense of all of Georgians' liberties. Our Constitution is sacred. And you ask about my other colleagues. Even the Democrats in the chamber that I have vehemently disagreed with on so many different issues. It's gotten some rough political debate, but they've come to me and they said, Colton, the Constitution is sacred, right? We still have the ability to go up to that well and we can debate our issues, and we recognize a constitutional republic. But you have this speaker who thinks his word is more powerful than the entire legislature. So, it's one of those quirky things that you learn in high school government class or maybe a college basic political science class where, you can't arrest a senator or a state representative if they're going down to the Capitol or give them a speeding ticket, right? Well, why is that? Because, I guess if the governor disagreed with a legislator, they could just have them arrested and you wouldn't have to listen to those people's voices anymore.
Well,
right?
And I think there's an implicit message in that the work of a legislator is vital to the governance of the state. And you were elected by 200,000 people in West Georgia to represent them in the state Senate, and their voices have every right and reason to be heard, and you are their voice.
Right.
End of story.
No, exactly.
So what's driving this guy? John Burns seems to be kind of a short guy to me. I'm not trying to indict all short people, but does he just have a little man's complex? Is he a tyrant? Is he got anger management issues? What's his deal? Do you have any sense of what's driving him?
Most definitely a tyrant. I don't know about his personal life when it comes to anger issues. I know when we were in that meeting, and I told him that, I didn't believe he had a constitutional ability to stop a joint session for me entering. He got extremely angry. Rocking back in his seat, mad.
How dare you challenge his authority?
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, I think a lot of other legislators are starting to kind of realize that, because this is a perfect example of tyranny. And just like I told those state troopers that were standing there, we all swore an oath to the Constitution. And if we're not going to uphold the Constitution, then the Constitution has no value, right? It might as well be lint that you're pulling out of your home dryer, because that it would be equivalent. The only power it has is then would we as a republic recognize it and we uphold it. And John Burns absolutely destroyed it.
So how do you think this is going to play out now? Or have the charges been dropped against you? I mean,
No.
what were the charges? Say interference with the
Willful obstruction of
yeah.
a misdemeanor, which constitutionally it says a legislator cannot be charged with a misdemeanor. But I was charged with willful obstruction misdemeanor. And I can't even pursue civil action, to my understanding, according to my attorneys, until this criminal case has been dropped. I was supposed to be in court in Fulton County at 10 a.m. this morning. And I told them, you can find me in the Senate chamber, because that's where I'll be representing my constituents. So, you know, I haven't really touched base today with my attorneys about what exactly is all going on when it comes to that. But constitutionally, I shouldn't be guilty of a misdemeanor, because I could have never been charged with one to begin with.
Well, I watched the video. You were not the aggressor. That doorman was the aggressor. And based on what you're maintaining, he lacked the authority to do what he did. I happen to agree with him. What I think means very little, other than the fact that it's, I think, a reflection of what a lot of people are saying. And that is that Burns really acted out of place and did not have the right or the reason to do what he did. I mean, you know, I guess if they had held that joint session across the street at that meeting area where you hold a lot of meetings, there would have been absolutely nothing he could have done. And so he seems to think that the House chambers belong to him. Well, Mr. Speaker, I've got news for you. They belong to me and the citizens of the state of Georgia. This is not your state capital, sir. So stop acting like you're singularly in charge. I hope the voters teach Mr. Burns a lesson and show him who is in charge, because he is not deserving of the office that he is maintaining, in my opinion. And I've been in and around politics for more years than you've been on earth. So I feel like I have a little bit of insight. And I've never met Mr. Burns. I don't have anything against him. I'm not on a mission, but I am offended by the way that you were treated. And I am offended by the position that he has taken. And I'm offended, frankly, that the Georgia Senate passed that resolution to honor David Ralston, because just like Mr. Burns, I never met David Ralston. I know that he has a lot of people who were very loyal to him and held him in high regard. But the things that you brought out, that the Atlanta Journal and Constitution brought out, I heard those rumblings long before you ever spoke them. And people that serve in elected office must strive for a higher standard, and they should be held to a higher standard. And so we can debate what the Senate did all day long. It doesn't really matter, except you had every right to go to that podium and say what you did. You have a First Amendment right, but you also have a right that the voters of your district inured upon to your benefit, that you are there to speak on their behalf, and that's what you did. And to punish you for that, I think is despicable. So let me ask you this. What do you think? Is the whole system in the Gold Dome, is it rotten? Is it corrupt? Is it just a bunch of actors? I mean, I don't know what pigeonhole to put this in.
No, absolutely. I've certainly believed that for quite a while now. And I think one of the greatest, blessings of the sacrifice of walking into 18 state troopers, pretty well knowing that you were going to get arrested, was the fact that now what it kind of does is it forces the issue. It forces legislators to have to take a stand and pick a side. And so nothing at the Capitol moves without force. a politician gets elected, the first thing they want to do is just hide under their desk and not do anything, because they're like, well, we got elected to be here, and anything we do that might jeopardize our chances of getting reelected.
I've seen that played out many, many times, and that's not cool with me.
No doubt. So you
Go
have to
ahead.
force them to make a decision. And right now, you see a lot of legislators who are lining up and they're supporting. They understand clearly, and this is on both sides. This is Republicans and Democrats who recognize that they have a constitutional right to enter in proceedings. And then you see legislators who say, you know what, I don't want to get involved in this. The Speaker of the House, he's right. Or maybe they think, I'm worried that he's going to come after me if I say anything. So what I like about it, what I think the blessing is right now,
That's tyranny,
issue.
by the way.
That's tyranny by definition. Speaker Burns is a tyrant.
Well, so I'm trying to remember. You've been a troublemaker for a while.
Good trouble. Good trouble.
I like you. That gives me the privilege to pick on you. But you got out in front on an issue 6 or 9 months ago in President Trump's defense, and he was very grateful to you for what you did. Refresh our memory on what that was.
Yeah, that's right. It was actually more than a year ago now when Fani Willis dropped the indictment before the grand jury had ever concluded, if you remember that. There were 19 people charged in felony RICO, where they basically put Donald Trump and a bunch of others from across the country and made it look as if they were an organized mafia. We were charging them under mafia laws, and essentially wanted to put all of them in jail for the rest of their lives. Many of those individuals ended up having to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on legal fees to try to protect their freedoms. And, it was all based on such fraud. I mean, these individuals were questioning the integrity of an election, which they have a First Amendment right to do. And she decided to create a chilling effect on all citizens in Georgia, and saying that if you try to do this, well, I could potentially put you in jail for the rest of your life. She was a domestic threat to our Constitution and our state. I take that oath to the office extremely serious. I mean, that's just like me walking into the House chamber yesterday or going after Fani Willis. I believe she was a domestic threat to the Constitution. My constituents didn't like the fact that their tax dollars were funding that type of nonsense, and I wanted her to be investigated. And the first question I wanted to know was, why did the indictment come out before the grand jury ever concluded? When people said, well, why does that matter? Well, was she judge shopping? Did she know the next judge on the list would be beneficial to her, right? Judge McAfee? Well, why is Judge McAfee important? Well, Fani Willis used to be the boss of Judge.
Absolutely. Precisely.
Right? I mean, you can start putting those puzzle pieces together quite quickly. So anyway, I was calling for a special session at the time. Remember, this indictment comes out in about August, and the legislature's not in session. So in order to take immediate action, the legislature would have to call a special session. And we could investigate, we could defund Fani Willis and hopefully put an end to the nonsense. And my my Senate Republicans, they were acting like House Republicans, I guess I could say. They decided that it would be more beneficial to boot me out of the Senate caucus than to boot Fani Willis out. And it was such a sad day then. I can remember sitting in front of, Senate caucus leadership when they were deciding whether to boot me out of the caucus or not. And I remember telling them, gentlemen, before we leave here, we might as well go down to the National Cemetery and just go spit on all those graves. And this one senator comes undone. He goes, how dare you say that? He goes, my grandfather fought the Nazis in Germany. And I said, Senator, my granddad fought the Nazis in Germany too. And both of those men didn't go over there and risk everything for us to sit on our dead butts and not do anything about Fani Willis. There was another member of Senate leadership in there. He said, well, you just don't understand how this works. You're not an attorney. I said, Senator, you need to take your legal cap off, your lawyer cap, and put on your senator cap and recognize that you in the legislature are the only true check and balance to a rogue executive in Fani Willis. So, they booted me out of the caucus. I put too much pressure on them. I'm still not in the Senate caucus. I've asked to be back in the Senate caucus. I ask him almost every single day. Had the chairman of the Senate caucus come to me yesterday, and he goes, hey, would you like to? And I said, join the Senate caucus. He's like, oh, no, no, no. I mean, would you sign this piece of legislation for me? I ask him every day. So Fonnie Willis has obviously been a problem. They kind of agree with that now, but I'm still not welcome back in the caucus. And I think it's for this type of stuff.
Well, there is a Senate committee that is investigating Fonnie Willis, and they subpoenaed her, and she said that she wasn't subject to their subpoena. That has now gone to the, I don't know, Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court, or maybe I can't remember, a judiciary proceeding that ruled that, yes, she is subject to being subpoenaed by the state legislature. So where does that stand, and what do you think of their investigation so far?
I think their investigation is pretty sorry, to be quite frank. I know they don't like to hear that, and would kind of squeamish if they were to listen to it. But you got to think about it. We had this investigative committee for an entire year, almost an entire year, before they ever subpoenaed Fonnie Willis. The purpose of the committee was to subpoena Fonnie Willis. Why didn't you do that to begin with? And then you could have set the date of when she was going to come, but they didn't even start the process until after we were out of session. And this is something that a lot of people warned them about. Hey, you need to put the subpoena in while we're in session now. Don't wait till the session is over. And that's the argument that Fonnie Willis was making, to my understanding. So I think it was the maybe the third resolution that the Senate adopted this session was to recreate that Senate committee all over again. And I certainly voted for it. And I hope that they get to work on it. But as of now, I haven't seen anything.
Well, it just seems to me that we're infected by this disease that I see at the federal level as well. You've got Jim Jordan, and you've got Senator John Kennedy, and you've got all these people, Tom Cotton, all these people who are great when the cameras are on, and they go after the witnesses, and they back them into a corner, and they shame them, and then nothing happens. It's like the cameras are off. Nobody is held accountable for anything. Ditto in the Georgia Senate. I mean, I thought that that they were really on the right track when they started investigating Fonnie Willis. She needs to be held accountable. But the same thing with the judge, Scott McAfee. I mean, what did he do? He said, okay, there is at least an appearance of a conflict of interest. So we're going to resolve the conflict by getting one of you to get off the case. But what about the underlying conflict of interest? What about the fundamental unfairness of a prosecutor sleeping with a special prosecutor and going to attack a former president of the United States when anybody with a brain and two eyes could see that it was lawfare, and the sole purpose was to prevent Donald Trump from becoming president of the United States as our 47th president. And now she's off the case. The Court of Appeals threw her off the case. But McAfee, what a weakling. I mean, I don't want to handle this. So Court of Appeals, you do it. You do my job for me because it's too hot for me. The fact is, he knew that he was up for re-election. And if he had ruled against her, given the complexity or the composition of the voters in Fulton County, he would have been defeated as a Superior Court judge. Fonnie Willis would have led the fight, and he would have been toast. Well, so he punts to the Court of Appeals. They do the right thing. And I've said for 6 months that he botched it, that he did not do his job, and he let somebody else do the job for him. And I resent that. I mean, I
agree with you.
He took an oath. He gets a salary. He's charged with doing a job. And so the Court of Appeals basically said, you were wrong. End of story. All right, rest my case. All right, well, so you gave us 30 minutes and we're almost out of time, and I really appreciate your coming on. I've had fun talking to you. I picked on you a little bit, but in good jest, and just to try and kind of lower the tension, because I can imagine it's got to be pretty tough for you and your family right now. But what was it like when you came back to the Senate today? What were your colleagues? What was their demeanor towards you?
No, they were very supportive. Very supportive. The Senate was very supportive. Democrats, Republicans, people who, I really haven't spoke to all session. There was a lot of kind of just shock in the Senate. Like, we can't believe what just happened yesterday. I was very, very excited for the lieutenant governor to get up and basically show his support today. And
I did not see that. What did the lieutenant governor say?
Well, the lieutenant governor, he had his son there with him, and he said that, that his son had seen this on the news and was asking questions about, what exactly just happened. And he got, the ability to explain to his son what had happened and how he was going to be in defense of senators and their rights to speech, regardless of what opinions they had. And he would continue to do that going forward. So,
does John Burns survive this? Does he continue to be Speaker of the House?
As of now, he's still Speaker of the House. So I'll have to get back with you later on that. I think it would be to the benefit of Georgia that he's gone as soon as possible. I mean, first and foremost, before he leaves, though, he needs to make sure that Keith Williams no longer works for the state of Georgia and is no longer general counsel to the Speaker. And then he can resign as Speaker. But another one I'm a little, and I hate to be just the Debbie Downer on your show today, but Attorney General Chris Carr. I mean, what an absolute joke that has been. I mean, I asked for an emergency opinion the day before going into this, went up to his office, heard absolutely nothing, still waiting for a call back. And I think it's because he knows darn good and well I was in the right. But that I've asked him for, why didn't we go after Laken Riley's killer and make sure he had the death penalty? He had the ability to do that. He's had the ability to go in and investigate Fonnie Willis. He's investigated other district attorneys for like $5,000 frauds, and we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of fraud out of Fonnie Willis, but he's scared to go do that. I've had issues with the border up in Tennessee with our water, the Tennessee River that goes up there. Can't get a call back on that. So anyway,
I've heard his name before somewhere, and you may recall that when I ran against him for Attorney General 2 years ago, I referred to him affectionately as Chris Do Nothing Carr. I said it then, I'll say it now. I have no agenda other than to tell the truth. And that's what we do here every Saturday from 12 to 2 on the John Fredericks Radio Network. We've been listening to and talking to Senator Colton Moore, someone I highly admire because he has the guts and the courage to speak the truth. And that's worth a lot. Thank you,
Senator.
Senator.
You having me on. Thank you.
The Truth with John Gordon.
I woke up on top of the world this morning.
We break down today's political landscape and feature interviews with key guests.
It doesn't matter if they call you a or a
to uncover the real story behind current events in the United States.
Of course, saw a rifle pointing through a fence with a chain link. Okay, so
you're a good man. I just want to give you a compliment because you had courage to stay with the truth.
I hate injustice.
This is great fun. I like you and your ideas. So let's do some more of this.
Are you like me? Do you think that Butler, Pennsylvania on July the 13th was an inside job? I've studied it. I've studied it real carefully. I've looked at a lot of data. I've looked at a lot of information. I looked at Director Cheadle. I looked at Ron Rowe, the acting head of the Secret Service, and I looked at a lot of commentators. It seems to me that the number of failures, when you aggregate them, leave the inescapable conclusion that the Secret Service was either inviting someone to come in by burying their head in the sand, by not providing the safeguards that were necessary, or actually, I believe that the deep state was behind the attempted assassination. Now, our frequent listeners to the truth know why I say that. There's a mound of evidence that I could go through. But I'm just going to leave it at that for right now, because the point that I'm getting to is that if you agree with me, my suspicion that it was an inside job, it leaves the inescapable conclusion that Donald Trump is not safe today. I really worry about, and I pray for President Trump's safety. I pray that we can get him inaugurated on January the 20th and install him safely and securely in the White House. But as a recent Newsmax article pointed out, a gunman is only one way that someone could attempt to do harm to President Trump. Someone could use a dirty bomb, they could use a missile, they could use a rifle, they could shoot down an airplane with President Trump on it. So there are a lot of potential means of doing harm. It's complicated if the people who are protecting the president are either not capable, and that's the best that you can say, or are in some way complicit. Now, Christopher Wray said that they had no information of a credible threat against President Trump. That's the same guy who said that he thought that the injury to President Trump's ear was possibly just shrapnel. So I don't believe anything that Christopher Wray says, because he as much as said that he was aware of no FBI agents or confidential human sources that were present during the January 6th riot on the nation's capital in 2021. Then Michael Horowitz issues his report as the Inspector General of the United States and concludes that there were at least 26 confidential human sources inside the Capitol on January the 6th. So that just leaves the inescapable conclusion for me that Christopher Wray is not trustworthy. And that feeds into my suspicions about the deep state, which fuel my concern for the safety of President Trump. Well, look, I don't think that I am the only one. Newsmax obviously has voiced that concern in their report issued today. And they also identify our adversaries as possible threats to President Trump's safety. So at a minimum, President Trump is one of the bravest people that I know, and we need him. We overwhelmingly elected him. Now, another concern about President Trump's safety relates to his health. He is getting up in age. I'm sorry, Mr. President, but you need to shred a couple of LBs, my friend, and maybe push those Big Macs aside and eat some chicken or fish. But a stroke or a heart attack is a legitimate concern, as Newsmax points out. And then there is a real concern about the health of our economy as President Trump takes office. And he's inherited some serious, serious problems. Runaway inflation is still an issue. High interest rates are hurting the American citizen and homeowners and people who borrow money and have to pay rising interest rates. And then this looming federal budget that is completely out of control. He's going to have to deal with that as well. One other data point. Do you remember on November the 6th, the market took a huge shot up? It went up to just under 6,000 on the S&P 500, and the Dow Jones Industrial Averages went up about 600 points in one day. That's a big rise. Well, the bad news is we've given a lot of that back since November the 6th. And if you watch the market, as I do every day, and I study it every day, it seems to be going sideways. What does that tell you? To me, it tells me that there is uncertainty and a certain amount of insecurity in terms of the market and where it's going. And I think that people like me are nervous about the inauguration. I want you to join me and pray for President Trump's safety. I want you to join me and be ever vigilant. We've got 77 million Americans who voted for President Trump. Now, that's one heck of a community watchdog army. So let's all be watchdogs over the next 7 days. See something, say something. Now, I'm not going to be scared. President Trump's not scared. I do hope that he is taking every precaution, and the people around him are insisting that they take precautions, that they have their own independent security looking over the shoulder of those who we entrust with the president-elect's safety. And that's the truth. And I'm John Gordon.